Okay, we're ready to roll. Okay, we've been talking up until now about some fairly esoteric questions, which while they're interesting and the application, the principles behind them are very important to know. They haven't been of very practical application to us unless you're going to be making cheese. I mean, obviously the principles that we've learned from them are important, and we can learn them out into other circumstances. But so far we haven't. A lot of the stuff we've been talking about has been kind of theoretical. That's all going to change tonight. We're going to be. There's a very interesting issue over here that is a very practical in our kitchens nowadays, and that is the question of having milchiks and fleishiks on the same table. Okay, and it's. I'm going to start you off with the Mishnah there's a Mishnah in Chulin, which tells us that you are not permitted to put meat and cheese on the same table. Let me just freeze this fan in place because it's occasionally making noises. Okay. So if you look in the Mishnah of Chulin, Perek Ches Mishnah Aleph, it says Ha'of oleh im hagvina ala shulchan ve'eno nechal divrei Beis Shammai. So Beis Shammai say that you're allowed to place chicken on the table with cheese, but you're not allowed to eat them together. This is according to Beis Shammai. Beis Hillel omrim lo ole v'lo ne'echal. You're not allowed to put it on the table, and you're not allowed to eat it. Amar Rabbi Yossi zo mikule Beis Shammai mechumer Beis Hillel. Okay, this is one of the kulas of Beis Shammai and the chumras of Beis Hillel that Beis Shammai say, listen, why are we getting all fussed? It's chicken. Even if you had to cook the chicken with the milk, it would be it would only be asad rabbanan. So why are we making a big deal of this? Beis Hillel say, forget about it. Even chicken you're not allowed to put on the table. Clearly, both of them. This is like a goes without saying sort of statement over here. That if the Mishnah is telling us that there's an argument about whether chicken can go on the table, then certainly beef is not permitted to put on the table with cheese or any other milchiks. Okay. Ba'ez shulchan amru, says the Mishnah. What kind of table are we talking about? B'shulchan she'ochel alav. This is the table at which you eat. About b'shulchan she'soder alav is a tav shel. So if you're preparing on your kitchen counter, there's no problem with having the fleishiks next to the milchiks, because the kitchen counter is not a place where you eat from typically. And okay, I say this as someone who's like thinking about, wow, when I was preparing supper tonight, I was definitely nibbling on things. but nonetheless, the point is it's not where you make your suda on the kitchen counter, and therefore there's no prohibition of having the meat and milk on the same counter in the kitchen. But at the table where you're eating, you're not allowed to have milchiks and fleishiks at the same place. And of course we rule halacha like Beis Hillel in most of the time. So we are machmir. We don't even allow chicken on the same table as milchiks.
Why would that be, Shaw? Because if you're preparing something on where you're preparing your food, all right, and you put down, you're working with the meat, and then all of a sudden you take out some cheese and you put it down, and then you move over the cheese to something else. You move the meat over. Now you're not cooking with it, but it's still might be touching.
Right.
And
Okay. So what we learned from this, you're correct. You're correct to ask the question. What we learned from this is that the issue that we have is that somebody's going to forget themselves and eat them together. Right. When you're preparing food, you're not going to forget yourself and feel hungry or say, "Oh wow, that looks so." You forget yourself when you've got a timer, and like you say, "Okay, I was just eating fleishiks, and I look at over there at that cheese. Oh man, that cheese looks so good," and I just forget myself because I don't know if that's ever happened to you, but for me, I know that sometimes when I look at something and say, "Oh, that tastes good," the food's already halfway to my mouth before I realize that I'm actually that I'm about to eat it. So that's the kind of thing that's easy to forget yourself. So the whole thing is a gezerah to protect us. So from the Mishnah over here, the Shulchan Aruch paskins on this. and this is in Siman Peiches now. So in Siman Peiches in the Shulchan Aruch, let me actually just pull this up in Sefaria. To sorry, I'll just go straight into the English then if I can't get this quickly. Back to here we go. Halacha, Shulchan Aruch, Yored Haya, and Peiches. Okay. So afilu basachaya va'of asu lahalos ala shulchan she'ochel alav. So straight away the Shulchan Aruch comes away and paskins the halacha like Beis Hillel. Even chicken is not allowed to go on the table. So that you should not come accidentally to eat them together. Aval. So it's saying straight, exactly like the Mishnah said according to Beis Hillel. The fact that you're not allowed to put them together on the shulchan, davka b'shnei b'nei adam, hamakirim ze eseh. This, however, is specifically when you have two people sitting and eating. Let's say two people, one person's having fleishiks, one person's having milchiks, okay, who know each other. Afilu hem makpidim ze el zeh. Even if they're either angry with each other or just very particular about, I eat my food and you eat your food. So they're people who are not going to dip into each other's food. But even so, we say they're not allowed to have to do this, to eat milk. This one milchiks, this one fleishiks at the same table. Okay, aval achsenayim. If you have people who are guests in let's say in a hotel or in an inn, or or you could even say where else, some sort of canteen or casual place, we have people who just don't know each other, and one guy brought, or your work lunch, one guy brought a cheese sandwich for lunch and the other one brought some chicken, okay, and they want to sit down at the same table. This is permitted, okay, because they don't know each other, okay. Now, okay, so just to finish that point, if there are two people who don't know each other or who have no personal connection, and they're sitting at a table just because it's convenient, that's the picnic table that they're at, then they're allowed to eat like that, because there's no worry that one of them is going to reach over and take the other person's food, okay. Now, even for people, so what do you do if you have, as quite frequently happens in my household, you have two people who decide, we're serving fleishiks for supper, and somebody says, I don't want to go to fleishiks jail. I'm planning to go out for ice creams later, so they decide, what, I'm going to make myself pasta and cheese sauce or something like that, but they want to come and sit and eat with us. Okay. So there's an eitzah over here. The Shulchan Aruch says it. Even somebody, if you make some sort of visual, a heker, how would you, a sign?
A mechitza, no?
Huh? Well, a mechitza, you're going quite far already. It doesn't have to. It has the term that we're looking for is a heker. A mechitza would be a good heker, but it doesn't have to be as high as a mechitza.
No,
in order to do it,
but some kind of siman shows that.
Right, exactly. There's got to be a siman. It's got to be a heker, some sort of visual guide that says that when you're eating your meat and you think, oh, there's cheese over there. And you say, whoa, what's this thing doing on the table? So, for example, if you have, if you actually do this lechatchila, what you could do is you could say, well, everyone else is eating on this tablecloth, but the person who wants to come and eat milchiks at the table will take another cloth and put it over their end of the table, and it'll be clearly different from the other tablecloth, and they'll put their milchiks on that thing. That's called a heker. You can see that the one side of the table is different from the other. Or if you don't want to go to the trouble of having a separate tablecloth, you can eat on one tablecloth and nosnim beinehem pat lehekera. You could even put a loaf of bread in between, says the Shulchan Aruch. Okay, but the Ramah jumps in. Okay, you're going to probably ask the question about that the Ramah is going to answer. Go ahead, Lester.
No, if the question's about to be answered, then just ignore me. But can those people eating different things share the common stuff on the table? The salt and the pepper,
Excellent.
and the
Excellent.
and the bread
Great.
and the vegetables.
That's a great question. We're going to get to it.
Okay.
You're thinking exactly on the right lines, and we're going to get there. Okay, so the Ramah comes and says that if you're going to use bread, if you're going to take a loaf of bread and stick it in between the people and say that that this is my simon that we're not going to stretch across, but that's when the loaf of bread that over there is not actually tonight's supper, because שנותנים לפס, המונח ביניהם להקר. אבל אם אוכלים ממנו, לא הווה הקר. If that's the bread they're eating from, that's not called the הקר. זה בלאו הכי הפס שאוכלים ממנו מונח על השולחן, because in any case that bread would be sitting on the table. So that doesn't really make any difference. That's not going to be any sort of visual cue that tells you you're doing the wrong thing now. אבל אם נסנו ביניהן כלי ששוסין ממנו ובלאו הכי אין דרכו להיות על השולחן ההקר. Any kind of kli that is not normally on the table. So it could be that you're having sort of a weekday meal and you take the fine crystal decanter and you put that on the table and you say, okay, that's not normally here. Why is it not here? Oh, that's right, it's fleischiks on that side, milchiks on this side. Or you can take anything that doesn't typically land up on the table. I mean, in my household, when this happens, we typically reach over and grab a pencil case or something like that, and stick that on the table, or a clock, or anything that is not typically found on the table. You put that down there, and people see that and say, "Oh, what's that doing there?" And you say, "Oh, they're eating fleischiks on that side, milchiks on this side."
Isn't there a problem though with the bread? Because like let's say on Shabbos you're having fleish, and then let's say comes Shalashudas and you're having milkik, and you've used that bread in the fleishik, and now you have bread left over. So
well, I mean, we already said that the bread, if you're using this loaf of bread, it's got to be a loaf of bread that's not participating in the meal.
In the meal, right?
Because if you're and you certainly can't share bread between the people having the milchiks and the people having the fleischiks, because these people have got meat all over their hands, and these people have got milk all over their hands, and that's going to go bad. Yeah, Lester.
That was my question. It wasn't to do with the heter at all. It was to do whether these people can share the pair of ingredients on the table.
So like the salt cellar.
Well, no, like the vegetables, the salad. The food, the vegetables, the salad.
Yeah. Okay. So we're going to deal with that point in actually. We'll discuss it and we'll get there a little bit further in the Ramah over here. We'll talk. Not exactly your case, but it'll be a case that will cover what you're asking. Okay. אף על פי ששצין מן הכלי. אוקיי, בכל שכן אם שם מנורה או שדור הקר, ויוזהירים שלא לשתות מכלי אחד, משום שהמאכל נדבק בכלי. And they also shouldn't share glasses, because somebody's been eating meat and they put their lips on the glass and they leave a little residue of meat on there, and then somebody from the milking side says, "Oh, let me also have a sip of your water," and now they bring the residue of meat into their mouth. So you've got to make sure not to mix those kalim over here. And certainly they should not eat from one loaf of bread, says the Ramah. And he says there's also a minhag to designate a particular kli, salt bowl for meat, and a salt bowl for milk. So the salt container that was typically in use, I guess, in their times, and we see a lot of people do that on Shabbos particularly, is they have salt in an open bowl and they sort of dip their bread into that bowl, and that the Ramah says it's a good idea to make sure that you have separate meat and milk bowls, because you're going to have residues of meat and milk going from one into the other. Now the salt shaker that we have nowadays, you don't actually ever handle the salt. You handle the outside of it, and you shake it, and you shake the salt directly, and you're never going to have the salt from the inside actually coming into contact with meat or milk. The only thing that's going to happen is that people might have greasy hands, touching the outside. So there again, for that reason, if you're going to have greasy hands in the meal, it's a good idea to make sure that each side of the table has their own kalim.
That would be the same if you're having ketchup, if you're having soda, if you're having any one of those things.
all these things, anything where hands are going to go onto it, it's a good chance that that things are going to get mixed up like that. So
you don't have
I would
to be
say,
worried. You don't have to be worried. Like sometimes you don't have to be worried. Sometimes, I mean, either moisture going into the salt, or even if you have kids, sometimes they'll put like the ketchup you said, or even the salt like on the food itself. They're not always so careful.
I see that and I cringe when that happens.
Right.
Like really sure that your ketchup goes onto your hot dog, and
Right.
and they're sort of scraping the top of the ketchup along the hot dog.
Right.
Okay. In all these cases, by the way, if they do that, just wipe it clean afterwards, because it's unless you're talking about something that's like really ferociously hot, hot, that it's going to actually cook some meat taste into the kli that the ketchup is in. I wouldn't say it's a problem. Just make sure to wipe it clean afterwards. And if you have a salt shaker that you share, that you put on the table, sometimes for milk, sometimes for meat, it's a good idea to wipe it down in between, because if people have been handling their meat, and then they take the salt and whatever and leave their meaty fingerprints on it. So it's a good idea to have those cleaned in between meals. I mean, just hygienically as well, but but kashrus wise also. Okay. So there's a question, by the way, about why Beis Hillel is so strict about chicken, because I mean ultimately, normally when we make a gezerah, Rabbanan make a gezerah to protect a Torah din. Okay, to make sure that you don't have meat and milk cooking together literally. I mean, let's even take a step further back and talk about why is this a problem even for fleishiks? Because typically on the table, you're going to have, fine, you'll have some chicken on the table, but let's say worst case, there was a glass of milk on the table, or even a piece of meat, right? You've got a piece of meat on the table, and but by the time this piece of meat on the table is on the table, it's not going to be a kli rishon. So even if milk spills onto it, it's not going to really be it's not even going to be a doraisa. So that really you've got here sort of an edge case of the situation where, let's say you're taking like the original soup pot or the cholent pot is going to go on the table. Now that's a kli rishon. And so it's because of that sort of situation where you've got a kli rishon on the table, and if you bring milk to the table, then it's quite possible that you'll actually have bishul happening, and you'll have real doraisa basa b'chalav happening over there. But
you have milk on the table, and you bring you have a colored cholent pot on the table, and it's let us boil.
Right. So that I'm just trying to make a case, trying to find a case where you would actually have an issa doraisa on the table. Because if it's just like, okay, you put a steak on the table, the steak itself is typically okay. Maybe you're right. Maybe it's possible that also as a davar gush, it's come straight out off the grill, and it's piping hot, and now that would also be a case where if you spilled milk on it, it's possible that we will get into tata gavar about the fact that if something is hot underneath and something cold spills onto it, it still cooks. It still cooks, and it's considered cooking. Okay, so remember that the principle I just want to get across here is that when we are concerned about when Rabbanan make gezeras, it's always a gezerah around a din Torah. So when we're talking about chicken, there's like never a din Torah involved. So why is Beis Hillel machmir? I can understand that they're going to be machmir about basar, about real meat. But why are they machmir about chicken? And there are a couple of explanations. So, one explanation from the Kreisi is that Chazal felt that there are many isurim that Chazal can decide. You know what? We know that we're going above and beyond the normal call of duty here, but greater precaution is necessary. And Tosfos says in a similar vein that sometimes Chazal said that yeah, we'll make a gezerah legezerah, and it's in their prerogative to do so when they feel that there's a need. And the Ran gives another answer, a similar answer, that if not for the gezerah of putting chicken and milk on the same table, the gezerah of not eating chicken and milk wouldn't last. Because maybe people would come to the conclusion that say, oh, it's okay to put chicken and milk on the table, and it's not really such a strong issur, and well, maybe we'll just eat them together anyway. So they just wanted to make sure that they're reinforcing their gezerah, and they have the right to do so. Okay. So the Shach talks about putting meat and milk on the same table. You're not allowed to do that because you might come to eat them together, since they are permitted on their own to eat. You're allowed to eat them. You're allowed to eat the flesh. You're allowed to eat the cheese, but you're just not allowed to eat them together. And you might, and because it's not something that people are instinctively flinch away from eating cheese. You don't flinch. You just say, oh gosh, I forgot I have a fleishik. Okay. But what turns out from this halacha, by the way, actually, was this actually in the Mishnah, is that if you have two work colleagues, let's say a Jew and a goy, sitting at the same table for lunch, and the goy pulls out his pork pie, and the Jew pulls out his, let me not use a pork pie, because we were talking about, yes, fine, let's use a pork pie. He brings out his pork pie, puts it on the table. The Jew brings out his cheese sandwich and puts it on the table. Is that allowed?
Yep.
Yeah, that's allowed.
Why
is it allowed?
You're never going to eat the meat. Well,
because the Jew, even though they're work colleagues, they're friends, they play soccer together, whatever it is. But the fact is that the Jew looks at the goy and says, "There's no way I'm touching that." That's like, you just have an instinctive, visceral, like, that's not for me. And therefore, there's no need to place any gezerah here, because there's no way that the Jew is going to forget himself and say, hey, let me have a taste of that. So as long as what the goy is having is not kosher, whether it's chazir, whether it's just nevela, whatever it is, as long as it's not kosher, it's allowed to be on the same table as his own food. Right? Another one of these curious situations where the halacha is more strict when the other food is kosher.
If the goy eats a kosher sandwich, for example.
Right. So if the guy went to it says, I love going to the kosher sandwich place. They make the best hot beef on rye, and he comes back and says, I've got this delicious hot beef on rye from the kosher place, and the other Jews got his cheese sandwich over there. I actually can't put this on the same table as you.
What about things like basar, iron, and things like that? How far do we take this?
Basar shenis alim min ha'ayin only applies to raw meat.
Really?
Yes.
Okay, because
so that story that you heard about the guy on the airplane never happened.
What story is that?
and if the guy goes to a restaurant who's hechsher, you don't hold bar, still have an issue, or don't you? I'm trying to understand where the cut
okay, so the question is like, if there's a right, so so the one guy is makpid on Rav Reuben, and the other guy is eating the chasam sofer or whatever. I don't eat chasam sofer, I only eat Rav Reuben, whatever. It's like, is that considered enough? Okay, so now I'm going to answer that question. I wasn't anticipating this question, but actually the next point in my notes is going to cover it. Okay, so just repeating what the Shach is saying is that it's only when the other food is asur. We say when the other food is asur, it's allowed to go on the table, but there are exceptions, and the first exception he brings is a neder. Okay, he says the halacha is, let's say you've got somebody made a neder. never going to. Chocolate is asur to me. I don't know why. Every time I think about nedarim, I immediately jump to chocolate. But he sits down at the table with his lunch, and his friend sits down and he puts a chocolate bar on the table. And he says, "Am I allowed to sit at this table? I've got a neder. I'm not allowed to eat chocolate." He says, "Okay, well, this is asur to me, so maybe it's mutar." So the Rosh says, "No. If somebody made a neder not to eat the food of his friend, it would be mutar for them to eat at the table, since they're more makbid than travelers." But the reason why we have to come onto the fact that they're more makbid than travelers, even though it's not basar b'chalav, is because people are not bedilim minay. It's only if they're. This is only if the two people are barogias. They're upset with each other, and that's why it would be permitted for him to, if he had actually had, if he was angry with him, if he took a neder from the other guy, then that would be allowed for them to sit, because the combination of him being upset with the other guy plus the fact that the food is actually asur to him because he made a neder that he's not going to have any benefit from the other guy, that makes it permitted for them to sit at the same table. But if they're just friends and the other guy brings out a chocolate, since in general people are do not instinctively flinch away from chocolate, because something that he made a neder from is not usually prohibited. So therefore, says the Rosh, it is asur for him to sit at that table. He can't sit at the table where he's got, or he can't eat at the table where somebody else has got chocolate. If he's not eating, then okay, he's not in the habit of, he's not reaching out to eat. But if he's sitting and having his own lunch, then he can't have then he can't sit at the same table where somebody's got some chocolate that he's asur to eat.
So you're saying
now the same thing. So now getting to your question about. I don't hold by that hechsher. It's not that it's isur. It's that my minhag is that I only eat this, and it's certainly, I don't even think it's got the koach of a neder. But even let's say it's got the koach of a neder, saying that all food that's not under X hechsher is asur to me. That would be like the extreme form of saying I won't eat anything from a different hechsher. Okay. And yeah, we see a psak that even in the case of a neder, he can't have his food at the same table as something that's asur to him.
So if he makes a neder that says, I have no intention of having any hanoah from you at all, anything, whatever it has to do with him, there's no hanoah from you, and so he doesn't sit at that table, because if the man puts out a chocolate bar, and he can't take the chocolate bar then.
Right. So he can't take. Hold on a second. Just a second. Wait. This is. Hold on. Wait. The differences are a little more subtle. The case of the neder is a case where he has where that food is asur to him. Whereas what you were talking about, Mark, is a case where he's eating a cheese sandwich and somebody else brings out a meat sandwich that's not from the hechsher that he eats. And you were looking at that. Is that possibly a heter? Because he considered because he won't eat it. So it's not the fact that. So I may have muddied the waters a little bit here because it's a subtle difference over here. We're talking about why he can't eat it is because it's basar b'chalav. And the heter over there is because if it was a goy there with his pork pie, or a goy there with nevela meat, then we'd say, okay, they can sit at the same table because he has no temptation to eat it. But would he? But if it was the case that you're saying, would he actually be allowed to sit at the same table? Sorry, Chian.
It's also interesting because the case with the guy, you could also make an argument if two Jews are sitting at the table, one fleishik, one milchik, you have two separate people who could warn each other, at least in theory. Whereas the pork pie with the guy, what does he know? Meat, milk, doesn't really matter. So it's interesting that the fact that there's that potential, I don't know, two-way warning doesn't count at all. It's not interesting. So what happens if
by the way, it does. If you have multiple people, that actually does make it better. and that's one of we actually it's in my notes later on that that if you have a number of people there who can warn each other, it does make a difference. But I don't want to say the full case out here because it's in a specific case that we say that. But yeah, the number of people there who can watch each other does make a difference. But I'm not going to say the full halacha out yet. Okay. So the first case, yes.
So a question that pops into my mind that's quite relevant, but maybe leading us astray. If you're at a Pesach Seder of Sfardim and they bring out the
Kitniot.
rice, the kitniot,
Yeah.
can you eat the rest of the food and ignore the kitniot? Or do you have to get up to
100%.
the table?
100%. Because no, you can totally eat inside the home of Sephardi family who eat kitniot, and what's more, you don't have to be choshesh for their pots either. Kitniot is batal barov. So even if they just use the pot to cook rice, okay, and they didn't even wipe it out properly, and then they cook some stuff that's non-kitnios in that pot, you're 100% allowed to eat that food. Because kitnios is not aser. It's such a, it's just, it's an Ashkenazi minhag, and it's a very easy bittul if accidents happen, and like less than 50% of the resulting mixture of this accident is kitnios, it's batel, even though you can taste it.
So we're not quoting you, but are you saying if you're in this person's house that you can eat that rice?
You can't eat the rice.
Okay, that's all. Make sure, because the way you were making it sound.
You can't eat the rice, but if they cooked some rice, and you were eating some kind of stew, and a cup and somebody passed the rice over you, and a couple of grains fell into the stew, and whatever, they got mixed up, and there was no way you could take them out. No, you eat it.
It's not chametz. It's
not chametz, right? But seeing as we're talking about chametz, that's the second example that the Shach brings, is that if it's during Pesach, and the Jew is Jew plunks down his matzah and whatever on the table, and the guy next to him pulls out a sandwich. It doesn't matter, even if it's a pork pie, and it's got chametz in it, because the pie is chametz. It's not the pork that's the problem; it's the chametz. So he's got to say, "Excuse me, I need to go to the next table." Nothing personal. Okay, but there's a difference over here. It's not because you're worried that he's going to reach out and take the chametz. Well, actually, no. There are two opinions about this. Rashba says you can't do it because chametz is an isur mashahu. Even if the tiniest amount of chametz falls into his food, then his food is going to become aser. So that little crumb of whatever, it won't become aser because it's treif, because a little crumb of chametz, okay, it fell in. No, it's less than 1 in 60. You can carry on eating. But if it's chametz on Pesach, your whole food is going to become aser. And the Orchas Chaim says that it says differently. He says it's mutter to allow a non-Jew to eat chametz on the same table as a Jew because they're like travelers. We act like they're not going to take each other's food, and the reason is because lo ala lechem ha'adam. The pasuk says that man does not live by bread alone. But nonetheless, bread is a staple food. And therefore, even though it's aser, people don't flinch from bread, and so the Shach infers that any bread that's aser to eat is aser to put on the table. So let's say the goy had some non-kosher ingredients in his bread. That's like not your standard paspalter. It's got some sort of unkosher ingredient, literally unkosher ingredients in the food, and he wants to sit and eat at the table with a Jew, not on Pesach we're talking about, and the Jew recognizes, this is some unkosher bread. He cannot eat at the table. It's worse than the pork. Why? Because bread is something that's a staple, and people don't instinctively flinch away from it, and therefore the Jew is not allowed to sit at the same table as the guy who's eating the non-kosher bread. Okay. So right from the Mishnah in Chulin again, Rabban Shimon ben Gamliel says that two travelers are allowed to eat at the same table, even though one is eating meat and the other is eating milk, and we're not worried that that they're going to eat from each other's plate. We saw this halacha paskin by the Shulchan Aruch. And in the Gemara, Rav Chanan Bar Ami says in the name of Shmuel, this Mishnah is taught in the case of Ein Makir and Ze'eseh, when they don't know each other. But when they do know each other, it's also for them to eat meat and milk at the same table. And the question came, Rav Yemer Bar Shlamai said to Avaya, what happens if you've got two brothers, but they're brogers with each other? Okay, they're on unfriendly terms. But they sit down and they want to eat at the same table because that's the only table they've got, and the one pulls out his meat and the other pulls out his milk. What's the halacha? And Abaye says to him, it's asur. Okay, so what we see from this Gemara is that if two people are friendly with each other, it's asur for one to eat milk and the other meat at the same table, because they're not embarrassed to eat from the other's plate. And this is also true in the case of brothers, even if they're makpid, because tachlis, they're brothers. You know, it'll be easier for them to reconcile with each other, and then suddenly they're not going to worry about taking food from each other. So the two factors that come in over here. There's the one is makir, where they know each other and they're comfortable with each other, and then there's makpid, which is they're particular about. I don't eat from yours, you don't eat from mine. Okay? Maybe they're germaphobes. Okay? So in the case of people who are not brothers, who know each other and are also makpid. Now, that's the question. We saw about brothers. Brothers we don't allow. But let's say you've got two people who know each other, but who are not friendly. They know each other and they hate each other. Okay? So what's the din? So Maharshal says that that only in the case of the brothers they need a heker to allow them to eat together. But other people, it's enough that they're makpid with each other, and you don't need a heker. If they're angry with each other and upset with each other and whatever, then that's fine. Then they can sit and eat at the same table. This one milk, this one meat, and there's no worry that they're going to eat from each other's food. It's specifically in the case of brothers that we're a little more stringent on that. However, the Taz and the Shach say that they agree with the Mechaber that in the case of any two people who know each other, forget about makpid or not. If they know each other, even if they're brogers with each other, then it's asur for them to have meat and milk at the same table. How are we doing? Time. Okay, well, we're going to go into a new subject, which the remaining time is not going to be enough for. So let's just summarize what we said over here. That in general, you can't put meat and milk on the same table. Your heterim for putting meat and milk on the same table are A, if it's a goy bringing non-kosher food on. Okay, that's allowed. Okay, unless you're talking about chametz on Pesach. All right. Next heter is if the two people. Okay, it's a machlokes between Maharshal, who's normally a lot more machmir, and the Taz and the Shach, who in this case are more machmir than the Maharshal, and say that if the people are upset with each other, then that can be a heter. Okay, but that's a machlokes, so it's best if possible to avoid that one. And the third heter, which is, okay, everyone's friendly, everyone loves each other, but they want to eat. So what you got to do? You got to make a heker on the table. And that's really the practical thing, is that you want to have a heker that's visible, that's going to make people sit up and notice and say, okay, this side is meat, this side is milk. And we said things that you could do is put a separate tablecloth that's visually different from the other one, and then that way you see that there's a meat side and there's a milk side. Or you can put something on the table that's not normally there. Something visible, not just something like you can't just take, for example, a couple of coins and lie them down there, because that's not readily visible. It's got to be something that stands up from the table. If you're going to make if you're going to make sort of a little mechitza over there, so put a menorah there, or a pencil case, something that you wouldn't normally find on the table. Okay, any further questions? All right.
Okay.
Then we are done for the evening. Thank you very much for your time.
Thank you so much.
Thank you, Shaul.
Okay.
Thanks.
Well,
Laila
Shaul.
tov.
Thank you.
Have a good evening, everybody.